tonight, before you try to force yourself to sleep again, stay here for a little while. Maybe your mind has been too loud lately. Maybe your heart feels tired, even if nobody notices. And maybe tonight, you came here carrying things you never said out loud. The fear, the pressure, the loneliness, the exhaustion of pretending you're okay. But right now, you do not need to carry all of that alone, because tonight, we are going to slowly walk through the Gospel of John, together, not as a lecture, not as a performance, not as noise, but as a quiet place to rest. Tonight, you will hear the words of Jesus, slowly, gently, peacefully. And as the night becomes quieter, maybe your heart will too. So, wherever you are listening from tonight, whether your room feels peaceful, or whether this has been one of the hardest nights you've had in a long time, take a slow breath. Let your shoulders relax. And remember this before we begin. You are not forgotten. You are not abandoned. And even in the middle of the darkest night, God is still with you. Tonight, let the noise fade. Let the fear slow down. And let the words of Christ carry you gently into peace. Tonight, we begin a quiet journey through the Gospel of John. Not as students trying to study, not as people rushing to learn information, but as tired souls searching for peace. And maybe that is why you are here tonight, because something inside you has been restless lately. Maybe your thoughts have felt heavy. Maybe your heart has been carrying too much for too long. Maybe you have smiled around people all day, while silently fighting battles nobody can see. And now the night has finally become quiet. No more distractions. No more pretending. Just you, your thoughts, and the silence. But tonight, you do not have to sit in that silence alone, because the words of Christ have comforted weary people for thousands of years. People who were afraid, people who were grieving, people who felt forgotten, people who were exhausted by life. And somehow, in the middle of their darkness, they found light again. The Gospel of John begins differently than the other Gospels. It does not begin with noise. It does not begin with crowds. It begins quietly, like the first soft light before sunrise. In the beginning was the Word, a sentence so simple and yet so powerful, because before fear existed, God was there. Before heartbreak existed, God was there. Before the worst night of your life, He was already present. Sometimes we forget that. When life becomes painful, it becomes easy to believe we are alone. Easy to believe nobody sees our exhaustion. Easy to believe our prayers disappear into silence. But the Gospel of John reminds us of something beautiful. God enters the darkness with us, not from far away, not from a distance, but personally, closely, tenderly. Jesus walked among tired people, hurting people, lonely people. He sat beside grieving sisters. He touched the sick. He noticed the people everyone else ignored. And maybe tonight you feel a little invisible too. Maybe you are tired of carrying emotions you cannot explain. Maybe your heart feels worn down from disappointment. Maybe you have been strong for so long that you no longer know how to rest. But tonight, you do not need to fight for peace. You can simply receive it. So, as we continue this journey through the Gospel of John tonight, let your breathing slow down. Let your shoulders relax. There is nowhere else you need to be right now. Imagine the cool night air moving gently across the hills of Galilee. The distant sound of water touching the shore. Lanterns glowing softly in the darkness. A quiet road beneath the stars. And somewhere in the distance, Jesus is walking slowly beside his disciples. No rushing, no panic, only peace. The kind of peace this world struggles to understand. And maybe tonight, your soul has been searching for that peace too. Not temporary comfort, not distraction, not noise loud enough to cover the pain, but true peace. The kind that reaches into anxious hearts. The kind that remains steady even during difficult seasons. The kind that whispers softly, "You are still loved." The Gospel of John is filled with moments like that. Moments where fear meets peace. Moments where shame meets mercy. Moments where exhausted people encounter the compassion of Christ. And perhaps, before this night ends, you will encounter that same peace too. Because no matter how dark life has felt lately, the light still shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Tonight, hold on to that truth gently. You are not abandoned. You are not forgotten. And even now, God is still near. So let the world slow down for a little while. Let the pressure fade. And as the night grows quieter, allow your heart to rest inside the words of Christ, the light in darkness. In the beginning, before cities existed, before human voices filled the earth, before pain entered the world, there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Before fear was ever felt by a human heart, he was already there. Before loneliness existed, before grief, before betrayal, before sleepless nights, God already existed in perfect peace. Sometimes it is difficult for us to imagine that kind of peace, because this world often feels restless. People rush through their days exhausted. Their minds never fully quiet. Their hearts constantly carrying invisible weight. Some people are surrounded by others all day and still feel alone. Some people smile in public while silently fighting darkness nobody else can see. And maybe tonight you understand that feeling. Maybe you know what it feels like to lie awake while your thoughts refuse to rest. Maybe you know what it feels like to carry worries so long. That exhaustion becomes normal. But tonight, the Gospel of John gently reminds us of something beautiful. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Not fear, not anxiety, not heartbreak, not shame, not grief. The darkness may feel strong sometimes, but it has never been stronger than God. And perhaps tonight you need to hear that more than ever. Because when life becomes painful, many people quietly begin losing hope, not all at once, but slowly. A little more each day, they become tired emotionally, tired mentally, tired spiritually, and eventually, they stop expecting peace at all. But Jesus came into the world to bring light back into dark places, not only for strong people, not only for perfect people, but for weary people, hurting people, people who feel lost, people who no longer know how to carry everything alone. The Gospel says that through him all things were made. That means the same God who created the stars also understands your heart completely. He understands your fears before you even speak them. He sees the hidden exhaustion nobody else notices. He knows the battles you are tired of explaining. And still, his presence remains gentle, not condemning, not cruel, gentle. That is one of the most beautiful things about Jesus. He never rushed wounded people. He never ignored tired hearts. Again and again, throughout the Gospel of John, we see Jesus slowing down for people, the world overlooked, people carrying shame, people carrying fear, people carrying grief. And maybe tonight, you feel like one of those people too. Maybe you have become tired of pretending you are okay, tired of acting strong, tired of carrying emotional weight that never fully leaves your chest. But tonight, you do not need to hide your exhaustion from God, because He already sees it. And somehow, He still looks at you with compassion. The Gospel says, "In Him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind." Not temporary comfort, not shallow happiness. Life, real life. The kind that reaches into empty hearts and slowly restores them again. And perhaps tonight, your soul is searching for that life. Not more distraction, not more noise, not another temporary escape from reality, but peace that actually stays. Peace deep enough to quiet the heart. Peace strong enough to survive difficult seasons. The kind of peace Jesus spoke about so often. Nicodemus came to Jesus at night. That detail matters because some conversations happen more honestly in the dark. During the daytime, people perform. They hide, they pretend. But at night, the truth becomes harder to escape. And maybe that is why so many people search for God late at night. Because the darkness has a strange way of revealing what our hearts are truly carrying. Nicodemus was respected, intelligent, religious, and yet something inside him still felt incomplete. So he came searching for Jesus quietly. And maybe tonight you are searching quietly too. Searching for peace. Searching for hope. searching for reassurance that your life still has meaning. And Jesus responded to Nicodemus with words the world would never forget. For God so loved the world, not tolerated, not barely accepted, loved deeply, fully, completely. And maybe that feels difficult to believe tonight, especially if life has been painful lately. Especially if disappointment has exhausted your faith. Especially if your heart feels numb from carrying too much for too long. But the love of God was never dependent on perfect circumstances. It reaches people in the middle of storms, in the middle of grief, in the middle of fear, in the middle of sleepless nights. Jesus said that light had come into the world. And maybe tonight, that light is reaching for you too. Not to shame you, not to condemn you, but to guide you gently out of darkness. Because darkness often convinces people they are trapped forever. That peace will never return. That healing will never come. That rest is impossible. But Jesus speaks differently. He speaks like someone who understands human suffering completely and still carries hope. And perhaps that is why millions of tired hearts continue returning to his words. Because even now, after thousands of years, his voice still brings peace into dark rooms, still calms anxious minds, still comforts grieving hearts, still reminds exhausted people that they are not alone. Jesus and the lonely. The sun was high over Samaria. The air felt dry, still heavy with heat. Most women came to the well earlier in the day, when the temperature was cooler, when groups gathered together to talk and laugh. But one woman came alone. At noon. That detail matters, because lonely people often learn to move differently than everyone else. They avoid crowds, avoid questions, avoid the eyes of people who already decided who they are. And perhaps tonight you understand that, feeling more than you wish you did. Maybe you know what it feels like to slowly withdraw from people. Not because you hate them, but because carrying pain quietly becomes exhausting. The woman at the well had likely become familiar with shame, familiar with whispers, familiar with judgment, familiar with feeling emotionally distant, even when surrounded by others. And maybe that kind of loneliness hurts the most. Not physical loneliness, but emotional loneliness. The feeling that nobody truly sees your heart anymore. The feeling that even if you explained your pain, people still would not fully understand it. So she came to the well alone. And perhaps she expected this day to feel like every other day before it. Quiet, empty, forgettable. But Jesus was waiting there, tired from traveling, resting beside the well. And when she arrived, he spoke to her, not with disgust, not with judgment, but gently. "Will you give me a drink?" Such a simple sentence. And yet, for someone who felt invisible, it changed everything. Because Jesus saw her, not just her appearance, not just her reputation, her completely. And maybe tonight, you need that reminder too. God sees more than the version of you the world sees. He sees the exhaustion underneath your smile. He sees the hidden grief you stopped talking about. He sees the nights you cried quietly, so nobody would hear. He sees the anxiety you carry into bed every night. And still, he stays near. The woman was surprised that Jesus spoke to her at all, because the world had already created invisible walls around her. Walls of shame, walls of rejection, walls built from years of emotional wounds. But Jesus has always moved differently than the world. He moved toward broken people, not away from them. Toward grieving people, toward anxious people, toward lonely people. And maybe that is why so many exhausted hearts still feel drawn to him today. Because Jesus never treated hurting people like burdens. He treated them like they mattered. The woman tried to hide behind conversation. People often do that when they are hurting. Sometimes they avoid vulnerability by changing the subject. Sometimes they speak casually because deeper honesty feels too painful. But Jesus gently reached beyond the surface, not to embarrass her, not to expose her cruelly, but because healing begins with truth. And perhaps tonight, your heart is tired of hiding too, tired of pretending certain wounds no longer affect you, tired of acting like disappointment never changed you, tired of carrying loneliness silently while hoping nobody notices. Jesus told her about living water, water that would satisfy something much deeper than physical thirst. Because human beings carry spiritual thirst too, a deep longing for peace, for love, for belonging, for rest. And many people spend their entire lives searching for those things in places that cannot truly satisfy the heart. Some search through achievement, some through relationships, some through distraction, some through constant noise, because silence feels too painful. But eventually, the soul becomes exhausted, trying to survive without real peace. And maybe tonight, your soul feels thirsty too, thirsty for reassurance, thirsty for comfort, thirsty for a kind of peace this world cannot manufacture. The woman at the well had likely spent years feeling emotionally empty, years carrying disappointment, years feeling disconnected from hope. But one conversation with Jesus began changing everything, because Jesus has a way of reaching places inside people that nobody else can reach. Places hidden beneath fear, beneath shame, beneath emotional exhaustion. And maybe tonight, he is reaching toward your heart too, not with anger, not with condemnation, but with compassion. That is one of the most healing truths in the Gospel of John. Jesus knew everything about her and still spoke with kindness. Think about how powerful that is, to be fully known and still fully loved. Because many people secretly fear that if others truly knew them, they would walk away. If others saw the anxiety, the weakness, the mistakes, the emotional scars they would leave. But Jesus already knows every hidden part of your heart, and he has not abandoned you, not even now. The woman slowly realized she was standing before someone different, someone who saw beyond appearances, someone who understood pain without needing endless explanation. And perhaps that is why hurting people were always drawn toward Christ, because exhausted hearts recognize compassion when they finally encounter it. The woman eventually left her water jar behind. That detail matters too, because sometimes when people truly encounter hope, the things they carried for so long no longer feel as heavy. And maybe tonight, God wants to help you set something down too. The fear, the pressure, the loneliness, the constant emotional exhaustion, not all at once. Healing is often slow, gentle, quiet, but even now, peace may already be beginning inside you as this night grows quieter. Imagine the woman walking away from the well beneath the afternoon sky. The same world still existed around her. The same roads, the same town, the same people. But something inside her had changed because she had finally been seen. And perhaps tonight, your soul needed that reminder too. You are seen by God, completely, tenderly, lovingly, even in your loneliness, even in your exhaustion, even on nights when your heart feels too tired to keep carrying everything alone. Jesus still moves toward lonely people. And tonight, he is still near. Jesus heals the tired. There are some kinds of exhaustion sleep alone cannot fix. The kind hidden behind polite smiles. The kind people carry quietly into work, into conversations, into ordinary days. The kind that slowly builds over time. Stress, disappointment, fear, grief, pressure, the exhaustion of always trying to stay strong. And eventually, the soul becomes tired, not dramatic, not loud, just quietly worn down. And maybe tonight, that is exactly how you feel. Not broken completely, just tired, deeply tired. Tired of overthinking, tired of worrying, tired of carrying emotional weight that never fully leaves your chest. Tired of trying to appear okay, while something inside you feels heavy all the time. The Gospel of John is filled with people who came to Jesus, carrying invisible pain. Not everyone arrived with obvious wounds. Some carried fear. Some carried shame. Some carried years of disappointment. Some simply carried exhaustion, and Jesus always noticed them. That matters, because exhausted people often feel unseen. The world notices success, energy, confidence, but it rarely notices emotional fatigue. It rarely notices the quiet battles people fight at night, the moments nobody posts online, the moments where anxiety keeps the mind awake long after the room becomes silent, the moments where people wonder how much longer they can carry everything alone. But Jesus noticed tired people immediately, again and again throughout the gospel. People moved toward him because his presence felt different, safe, gentle, peaceful, not rushed, not harsh. There was something calming about him, something that allowed hurting people to breathe again. One man had been sick for 38 years. 38 years. Imagine how exhausting that must have felt. To wake up every morning carrying the same disappointment, the same limitations, the same unanswered questions. And perhaps tonight, you understand that feeling in your own way. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. Maybe you have carried certain fears for years, certain wounds, certain loneliness. Maybe part of you has quietly wondered if peace will ever truly return again. The man lay beside the pool, surrounded by suffering, surrounded by people hoping for healing. And after years of disappointment, hope itself probably felt exhausting, because repeated disappointment can make people afraid to hope anymore, afraid to expect anything good, afraid to believe healing is possible. And perhaps tonight, your heart feels tired of hoping too. But then Jesus approached him, not with cruelty, not with impatience, but with compassion. And he asked something unexpected. Do you want to get well? At first, that question almost seems strange. Of course, he wanted healing, but Jesus understood something deeper. Sometimes pain becomes so familiar, people stop believing life can ever change. They adapt to sadness, adapt to anxiety, adapt to emotional exhaustion, until survival becomes their normal state of living. And maybe tonight, part of your heart feels trapped there too, wanting peace, but struggling to believe it is still possible. The man explained all the reasons he could not heal himself, all the obstacles, all the limitations, and honestly, many tired people do the same thing, not because they are weak, but because exhaustion changes how people see the future. Pain narrows vision. Fear narrows vision. Loneliness narrows vision. After enough disappointment, people stop expecting miracles. But Jesus spoke directly into that hopelessness. Get up. Simple words, and yet full of life. Because Jesus has always spoken into impossible situations with calm authority. Storms calmed, blind eyes opened, broken people restored. Not because human strength was enough, but because the presence of God changes things human beings cannot change alone. And maybe tonight, your soul needs that reminder too. You are not carrying your struggles alone. Even if life feels uncertain right now, even if healing feels slow, even if your heart still feels heavy, God has not stepped away from you. Another father came desperately, searching for Jesus, because his son was dying. Imagine the fear inside, that father heart, the helplessness, the panic, the desperate hope. Parents understand that kind of fear deeply. The fear of watching someone you love suffer while feeling powerless to stop it. And perhaps tonight you are carrying fear for someone you love too. A child, a parent, a relationship, a future that feels uncertain. Fear has a way of exhausting the human heart, especially when problems feel beyond our control. But again, Jesus responded with calmness, not panic. Never panic. There is something deeply comforting about that, because human beings panic easily. Our minds race, our emotions spiral. But Jesus consistently carried peace, even in painful situations. And maybe tonight, you need to borrow some of that peace for your own heart. Because exhaustion often comes from trying to control everything ourselves, trying to solve every future problem before it arrives, trying to carry tomorrow's fears before tomorrow even begins. But Jesus repeatedly invited tired people to trust him instead of fear, not because suffering is easy, but because God remains present, even in difficult seasons. One of the most beautiful things about Christ is this: he never ignored human suffering. He saw it fully. He understood grief fully. He understood emotional pain fully. And still, he carried peace. Not shallow peace, not fake positivity. Do not be afraid. Night had fallen over the sea. The wind was growing stronger. Dark clouds moved slowly across the sky, covering the stars one by one. And far from shore, the disciples were alone in a small boat. The waves crashed harder against the wood beneath them. The wind howled across the water. Everything around them felt unstable, uncertain, dangerous. And perhaps tonight, you know what that feeling is like. Not a storm on the sea, but a storm inside your mind, inside your life, inside your heart. Because some seasons feel exactly like that boat in the darkness. You try to stay steady, but fear keeps crashing into your thoughts again and again. Worry about the future. Worry about finances. Worry about people you love. Worry about things completely outside your control. And slowly, anxiety exhausts the soul, especially at night, because fear often becomes louder in the dark. During the daytime, distractions exist. Noise exists. People exist. But at night, many people are finally left alone with their thoughts. And that is when fear begins whispering the loudest. What if things never get better? What if you fail? What if you lose everything? What if peace never returns? Fear asks endless questions, and exhausted minds try desperately to answer all of them. But fear rarely leaves satisfied. It simply keeps demanding more attention. The disciples understood fear that night. The storm had become violent. The darkness around them felt endless. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, they saw someone walking toward them across the water. At first, they were terrified, because fear distorts vision. Fear makes human beings assume the worst. Fear convinces people danger is everywhere. And perhaps tonight, anxiety has been distorting your vision too. Maybe exhaustion has made hope feel distant. Maybe disappointment has made peace feel impossible. Maybe fear has become so familiar that your body no longer remembers how to fully relax. But then Jesus spoke into the storm, and his words were simple. It is I. Do not be afraid. Not after the storm ended. Not after the waves disappeared. In the middle of the storm. That matters deeply, because Jesus did not promise his followers a life without storms. But again and again, he reminded them they would not face those storms alone. And maybe tonight, your heart needs that reminder too. You are not abandoned in this season. Even if life feels uncertain. Even if your future feels unclear. Even if anxiety keeps returning every night. God is still present in the storm. The disciples probably still felt afraid. Human fear does not disappear instantly. But something changed the moment they heard his voice. Because peace often begins when people remember who is still with them in the darkness. Not every storm ends immediately. Not every prayer is answered overnight. But the presence of Christ changes how people move through fear. There is something deeply calming about knowing you are not alone. And loneliness is one of the deepest fears human beings carry. Not simply physical loneliness, but emotional loneliness. The fear that nobody truly understands your heart. The fear that you are carrying life completely alone. But Jesus consistently moved toward frightened people, toward anxious people, toward weary people, struggling to keep going. And perhaps tonight, he is moving toward your exhausted heart too. Imagine the scene quietly. Dark water stretching endlessly beneath the night sky. Wind pushing violently against the boat. The disciples gripping the wood tightly as waves crash around them. And then, Jesus walking calmly through the storm. Not panicking, not rushing. Calm. That image matters. Because human beings panic naturally. Our minds race ahead into worst-case scenarios. Our thoughts spiral. We try to control futures we cannot control. But Jesus carried peace, even where chaos existed. And maybe tonight, your soul desperately needs some of that peace. The kind that breathes slowly, the kind that remains steady, the kind that says, you do not need to carry tomorrow tonight. Because many anxious people are mentally living 10 days ahead at all times. Thinking, planning, overanalyzing, preparing for disasters that may never happen. And eventually, the mind becomes exhausted, the body becomes tense, the heart becomes heavy. But Jesus repeatedly invited weary people into trust instead of panic. Not shallow positivity, real trust. Trust that God remains present, even when life feels uncertain. Peter stepped out onto the water for a moment, and as long as he focused on Jesus, he remained above the waves. But the moment he focused fully on the storm, fear overwhelmed him. And honestly, many people live exactly like that now. Their minds stay fixed entirely on the storm, the bad news, the uncertainty, the fear, the pressure, and eventually, anxiety begins pulling them underwater emotionally. But tonight, perhaps God is gently inviting your attention back toward Him again. Not because your fears are imaginary, but because fear becomes stronger when it becomes the center of your vision. Peter cried out for help, and immediately Jesus reached for him. Immediately. Not after a lecture, not after shame. Immediately. That is important because many exhausted people secretly fear they are disappointing God. They fear their anxiety means weak faith. But throughout the gospel, Jesus responded to struggling people with compassion far more often than condemnation. He understands human weakness, the Good Shepherd. There is something deeply comforting about being protected, not having to stay alert constantly, not having to carry every burden alone, not having to fear that if you become weak for one moment, everything will fall apart. But many people live exactly that way now, always tense, always overthinking, always preparing for the next problem before the current one even ends. And eventually, that kind of emotional pressure becomes exhausting. The body grows tired. The mind grows restless. The heart forgets what peace feels like. And maybe tonight, you understand that feeling very well. Maybe your soul has been carrying responsibilities for so long that you no longer know how to fully rest. Maybe you feel like you always have to stay strong for everyone else. Strong for family, strong for work, strong for relationships, strong for people who never realize how tired you truly are. But in the Gospel of John, Jesus speaks words that exhausted hearts desperately need to hear. I am the Good Shepherd, not a distant shepherd, not a careless shepherd, a good shepherd. A shepherd stays close to the flock. A shepherd protects vulnerable sheep from danger. A shepherd notices when one is wounded. A shepherd does not abandon the weak ones. And perhaps tonight, your heart needs that image more than ever. Because life can feel dangerous sometimes. Emotionally dangerous. Spiritually exhausting. There are seasons where people silently feel lost inside their own minds. Seasons where anxiety keeps whispering constantly. Seasons where loneliness becomes heavy enough to physically hurt. And during those seasons, many people secretly long for someone to guide them safely again. Someone trustworthy. Someone calm. Someone strong enough to carry what they cannot. Jesus described himself as exactly that kind of shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Think about how gentle that image is. Not a ruler demanding perfection. Not a distant figure watching coldly from far away. A shepherd walking closely beside tired people, guiding them, protecting them, remaining near during danger. And perhaps tonight, you need to remember that you are not walking through life alone. Even if life feels uncertain, even if your future feels unclear, even if fear keeps visiting your thoughts after midnight, God has not abandoned you. The world often teaches people they must survive entirely through their own strength, carry everything alone, fix every problem alone, never appear weak, never slow down. But human beings were never created to carry endless emotional weight without rest. That is why so many hearts become overwhelmed. The pressure becomes too heavy. The fear becomes too constant. The exhaustion becomes too deep. And eventually, people begin feeling emotionally disconnected from peace itself. But the voice of Christ sounds different than the voice of pressure. The voice of pressure says, do more, worry more, control everything. But the voice of the shepherd says, follow me. There is peace in that, because sheep do not survive by controlling the future. They survive by staying near the shepherd. And perhaps tonight, God is gently inviting your exhausted soul to stop trying to control everything alone. Not because your struggles are small, but because fear becomes unbearable when people try carrying it without God. Jesus said, his sheep recognize his voice. That matters deeply, because this world is filled with competing voices. Fear, shame, comparison, pressure, disappointment. Every day, people hear voices telling them they are failing, not enough, too broken, too anxious, too weak. But the voice of Christ speaks differently. His voice calms, restores, guides, protects. And maybe tonight, your heart desperately needs to hear that calmer voice again. Imagine the hills outside Jerusalem growing quiet beneath the evening sky. The soft sound of sheep moving through grass, the cool night air settling slowly over the land. And nearby, a shepherd remains awake while the flock rests safely, watching, protecting, remaining alert while others sleep peacefully. That image matters because many anxious people struggle to rest precisely because they feel responsible for everything. Their minds refuse to stop working. Their hearts refuse to stop preparing for danger. Even in bed, their thoughts continue running endlessly. But psalm after psalm, and again throughout the gospel, God gently reminds weary people, you are not carrying the universe alone. The shepherd remains awake, even now, even tonight, even while you rest. And perhaps that truth can finally allow your exhausted heart to breathe again. Jesus also spoke about sheep who were lost, and honestly, many people feel spiritually lost at times. Not evil, not hopeless, just tired, confused, emotionally overwhelmed. Some people slowly drift because disappointment wounded their faith. Some drift because suffering made life heavy. Some drift because the world became so noisy they could no longer hear peace clearly anymore. But the beautiful thing about the shepherd is this: he moves toward lost sheep, not away from them. Jesus wept. Some pain changes people quietly. Not all grief is loud. Sometimes sorrow settles slowly into the heart, until a person no longer remembers what life felt like before the loss. And maybe tonight, there is grief inside you too. Perhaps grief from losing someone you loved. Perhaps grief from losing a relationship, a dream, a season of life that never returned again. Or maybe the grief is harder to explain. The grief of becoming emotionally exhausted. The grief of watching life become heavier than you expected. The grief of carrying sadness silently, because you no longer know how to describe it to anyone else. Grief changes the atmosphere around a person. Even ordinary moments begin feeling different. Rooms feel quieter. Memories become heavier. Nights become longer. And often, the hardest moments arrive after everyone else has gone to sleep, because grief becomes loud in silence. That is why the story of Lazarus feels so deeply human. Jesus loved Lazarus. He loved Martha. He loved Mary. These were not strangers. These were people close to his heart. And when Lazarus became sick, the sisters sent word to Jesus immediately. Because when human beings are desperate, they reach toward hope, especially when someone they love is suffering. And perhaps tonight, you understand that kind of desperation too. The desperate prayers whispered in dark rooms. The prayers spoken through tears. The prayers people pray when they no longer feel strong enough to carry pain by themselves. Please help. Please stay. Please heal. Human beings have prayed those kinds of prayers for thousands of years. And still, many people struggle with one painful question. God, where are you when life hurts this much? Because sometimes God feels silent during suffering. The sisters expected Jesus to arrive immediately, but he delayed, and honestly. That part of the story feels painfully familiar to many people. Because there are seasons where heaven feels quiet, seasons where prayers seem unanswered, seasons where fear keeps asking, if God loves me, why does this hurt so much? And perhaps tonight, part of your heart is carrying questions like that too. But the story continues. By the time Jesus arrived, Lazarus had already died. The atmosphere was heavy with sorrow. People were crying openly. Martha ran to meet Jesus first, and even in her grief, you can hear the heartbreak beneath her words. Lord, if you had been here. That sentence carries so much pain, because grief often comes with hidden disappointment too. The ache of wishing things had happened differently. The ache of wondering what if, the ache of imagining another ending. And maybe tonight there are. What if questions hurting inside your heart too? What if things had changed sooner? What if I had done something differently? What if life had gone another way? Grief has a way of replaying painful memories endlessly. But even in the middle of sorrow, Jesus stayed close. That matters deeply, because many hurting people fear abandonment more than pain itself. They fear being left alone inside suffering. But Jesus entered directly into the grief of Martha and Mary. Not from a distance, personally, closely, tenderly. Martha still believed in him, but grief had exhausted her emotionally and honestly. Many faithful people understand that feeling, still believing, but tired, still praying, but weary, still hoping, but hurting deeply. Jesus spoke gently to her, not with anger, not with condemnation, but with reassurance. I am the resurrection and the life. Words filled with hope, but grief often struggles to hear hope clearly at first, because pain clouds everything. Mary came next, crying, broken-hearted, and when Jesus saw her weeping, something extraordinary happened. Jesus wept, the shortest verse in Scripture, and yet perhaps one of the most powerful. Jesus wept, not because he lacked power, not because he had no solution, but because he entered human sorrow fully. He allowed himself to feel grief with them. That matters more than many people realize, because some people secretly believe God remains emotionally distant from human suffering. But the tears of Jesus reveal something different. God is not cold toward your pain. He is not indifferent toward your grief. He is not impatient with your sorrow. He understands heartbreak personally. And perhaps tonight, your exhausted heart desperately needs to remember that you do not grieve alone. Even now, even in this season, even during nights where sadness feels too heavy to explain, Jesus stood outside the tomb, surrounded by sorrow, the air filled with mourning, the weight of loss everywhere, and still. Hope remained present even there, because darkness, the night, was growing quieter. The final hours before the cross were approaching, and yet, in the middle of everything waiting ahead, Jesus spoke gently to his disciples, not with panic, not with fear, but with peace. That matters deeply, because human beings often lose peace the moment life becomes uncertain. When the future feels unstable, the mind begins racing. When painful seasons arrive, the heart becomes restless. And maybe tonight, your heart has felt restless lately too. Restless from overthinking. Restless from carrying stress too long. Restless from fears you cannot fully silence. Some people become so emotionally exhausted, they no longer remember what calm feels like. Their body stays tense constantly. Their thoughts never fully slow down. Even during quiet moments, Their mind keeps searching for danger, and night can make that feeling even stronger. Because darkness removes distractions. Suddenly the worries return, the memories return, the fears return, and exhausted hearts begin asking questions again. What if things never change? What if I fail? What if I lose someone I love? What if I never truly feel peace again? But into that human fear, Jesus spoke these words: "Do not let your hearts be troubled, not because life would become easy, not because suffering would disappear overnight, but because His presence would remain with them, and perhaps tonight. That is what your weary soul needs most, too. Not perfect circumstances, but the reassurance that you are not abandoned inside difficult ones." Jesus knew His disciples were afraid. He knew confusion was coming. He knew grief was coming. And still, He spoke calmly. There is something deeply healing about calmness, especially for anxious hearts, especially for people who feel emotionally overwhelmed by life. The world often spreads panic quickly. Bad news, pressure, fear, comparison, constant noise. People carry so much information now that many minds never truly rest anymore, and eventually, peace begins feeling distant. But the voice of Christ sounds different from the noise of the world. Softer, steadier, safer. His words slow the heart down. His presence reminds exhausted people they do not need to survive entirely through fear. Jesus told His disciples, "My peace I give you, not temporary distraction, not shallow comfort. Peace, real peace, the kind strong enough to remain steady during uncertainty." And perhaps tonight, your soul is searching for exactly that kind of peace, because some exhaustion is not physical. It is emotional exhaustion. The exhaustion of carrying worry constantly. The exhaustion of trying to control the future. The exhaustion of pretending you are stronger than you truly feel. And eventually, the heart becomes tired, deeply tired. But Jesus invited weary people into rest again and again, not by denying pain exists, but by reminding them that fear does not have the final word. The disciples were about to experience confusion and heartbreak. Yet, Jesus still spoke about peace. That is important, because peace is not the absence of difficulty. Peace is the presence of God within difficulty. And maybe tonight, you need to hear that gently. Your life does not need to become perfect before your soul can begin resting again. God remains near even during uncertain seasons. Jesus also promised the Holy Spirit would remain with them. A comforter, a helper, someone who would stay close even after He was gone physically. Human beings fear abandonment deeply. The fear of being left alone, forgotten, emotionally disconnected. That fear quietly shapes many anxious hearts. But the gospel repeatedly reminds us God stays near, even in grief, even in fear, even during sleepless nights, even now. Imagine the room where the disciples sat, listening to Jesus that night. Soft lantern, light flickering against the walls, quiet voices, heavy emotions lingering in the air. Outside, Jerusalem slowly darkening beneath the night sky, and in the middle of all that uncertainty, Jesus speaks softly about peace. There is something beautiful about that image, because many people wait for life to become calm before allowing themselves to rest emotionally. But Jesus offered peace before circumstances improved, before fear disappeared, before suffering ended. And perhaps tonight, you can begin receiving peace before every problem is solved too. Not because your struggles are imaginary, but because your soul cannot survive endless fear forever. Eventually, human beings need rest, real rest, not merely sleep, but deep emotional rest. The kind that allows the nervous system to finally soften. The kind that allows breathing to slow. The kind that reminds anxious hearts. You are safe enough to rest now, Jesus said. In this world you will have trouble. Honest words, gentle words. Because Christ never lied about human suffering. He understood pain completely. And still he continued, speaking hope into fearful hearts. But take heart. I have overcome the world. That sentence has comforted exhausted people for generations, especially during dark nights, especially during lonely seasons, especially during moments where fear feels overwhelming, because the world often feels unstable. But Christ remains steady. Human emotions rise and fall, but Christ remains steady. Circumstances change constantly, but Christ remains steady. And perhaps tonight and now, the night has become very quiet. The world outside has slowed down. The noise of the day has faded, and perhaps for the first time in a long while, your heart is finally beginning to breathe more slowly too. So, before sleep comes tonight, let us rest here together for a few peaceful moments more. No pressure, no performance, no pretending you are stronger than you truly feel. Just stillness, just honesty, just the quiet presence of God. Tonight, you have carried enough already. Enough stress, enough fear, enough overthinking, enough emotional exhaustion hidden behind tired smiles. And maybe nobody fully understands how heavy this season has felt for you. But God does. Completely. Every silent worry, every anxious thought, every painful memory, every lonely night. He has seen all of it. And still, his love for you has not changed. So tonight, you do not need to hold everything together anymore. You can rest. You can let your exhausted heart loosen its grip on fear for a little while. You can stop trying to control tomorrow before tomorrow arrives. Because right now, God is still here, even in the quiet, even in the darkness, even in your uncertainty, especially there. Take a slow breath now, and as you breathe out, Let some of the pressure leave your body gently. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw relax. Let your thoughts become quieter, little by little. You are safe enough to rest now, not because life is perfect, not because every problem has disappeared, but because God remains near to weary hearts. Tonight, He remains near to yours. Father, for every exhausted person listening tonight, please bring peace into places. Fear has occupied for too long. Bring rest to anxious minds. Bring comfort to grieving hearts. Bring stillness to thoughts that never seem to slow down. Some hearts listening tonight feel deeply lonely. Some feel emotionally overwhelmed. Some are carrying hidden pain nobody else sees. Some are tired of pretending they are okay. And some are quietly wondering how much longer they can keep going. But Lord, You see every one of them completely. You see the tears nobody else noticed. You see the silent panic hidden behind normal conversations. You see the disappointment they never fully talk about. You see the fear they carry into bed every night. And tonight, please let Your presence feel close to them. Not distant, not unreachable. Close, like gentle light in darkness. Like calm after a storm. Like a hand resting softly on a weary heart. Lord, some people listening tonight are carrying grief. Grief from loss. Grief from heartbreak. Grief from seasons of life that changed them deeply. Please sit beside them gently tonight. Remind them they are not abandoned inside their sorrow. Remind them that even Jesus wept beside grieving people. Remind them that You remain near to broken hearts. And Father, for every anxious mind listening tonight, please quiet the storms inside them, the endless overthinking, the constant fear, the exhausting pressure to hold everything together alone. Help them. Remember, they do not need to carry tomorrow tonight. Help them. Remember, they are still safe in Your hands. Lord, some listeners tonight are simply tired. Not dramatic, not falling apart loudly. Just deeply tired. Emotionally tired. Mentally tired. Spiritually tired. Please let rest reach them tonight. Real rest. The kind that softens the nervous system. The kind that slows fearful breathing. The kind that reminds exhausted souls, you are no longer carrying this alone. And as sleep slowly comes tonight, let peace settle gently over every room listening, over every bed, every tired mind, every fearful heart, every lonely soul awake in the darkness. May Your presence feel like quiet shelter tonight. Like still water, like safety, like home. Father, thank You for staying near during difficult seasons. Thank You for loving people even when they feel weak. Thank You for remaining patient with anxious hearts. Thank You for never abandoning weary souls. Tonight, before sleep fully arrives, we place every burden into Your hands.